I guess we're here to talk about the smog.
That's right. I understand had a lot to do with the weather conditions, but also the pollutants that were being burned at that time.
That's correct. Yeah. So
Sure, you can tell us a bit
yes,
more. Yeah.
I'll try. Yeah. So it's probably worth bearing in mind at this stage that um, practically anything really, any material that's released to the atmosphere, its eventual fate is sort of heavily influenced by the weather. Now, with pollution that is emitted to the atmosphere, sometimes the weather is very conducive to helping that pollutant mix in the atmosphere with nice, cleaner air, so you don't get such a bad problem. But occasionally, the weather works against us, and it's not conducive to mixing, and we get these horrible high pollution episodes that we sometimes get. Um, so back in the smog days of 1952, a lot of the pollutants to the atmosphere were provided by people burning coal to keep warm because it was early December, so it was very cold. So a lot of people were burning what at the time actually was actually considered to be quite low grade coal, producing a lot of horrible nasties in the atmosphere. But on top of that, you had local factories burning a range of different material. And some of the emissions emitted from these factories were acidic in nature. So once in the atmosphere, if you were to breathe some of this in, it would actually burn the back of your throat, or sometimes people talked about skin irritation as well. So it gives us an idea of how concentrated some of these pollutants might have been. Um, Ordinarily, when these pollutants are emitted from the atmosphere, they rise up higher in the atmosphere, and the weather allows the various gases and particles to mix. And when they do so, the concentrations are diluted, and that's under good weather conditions. Sometimes, though, as was the case in 1952, we were under what we could term as an anticyclonic weather system was at play at the time, and this tends to push a lot of the air mass that's quite high down to the ground. And as this air mass descends, it tends to warm. So you get this odd situation where the air masses that are quite close to the ground are quite cool in compared to the warmer air above. We normally term this as a temperature inversion. Now, the effect this has is it suppresses the continual upward movement of some of those lower air masses. So you imagine that if those air masses are polluted, with all these emissions we spoke about from people's homes and from the factories, it tends to stop that from being mixed higher up in the atmosphere, and everything is kept at quite low ground level. But on top of that, very early on the 5th, I think, of December, um, the sky was quite clear, so a lot of radiation that might have been emitted from the ground was lost to space. Basically, just there weren't any clouds around at all to trap that heat. So we had quite moist surface and light winds. Now, these are traditionally very good conditions for the formation of fog. So we had fog form quite early on, and with those light winds that began to whip up a little bit of that fog until you got to the stage where you had a fog bank that was about 200 meters high or so. But remember, this is now mixing in with all these pollutants that were being emitted from people's homes and from the factories. And you add to that the fact that these the air mass and those pollutants couldn't go anywhere because of this temperature inversion trapping everything in. You had a terrible situation where this cocktail of pollutants were just left stagnant in a way, mixed up in the fog, um, to cause all the problems they did cause. And of course, that's where we get the term smog from, because it's smoke infused with the fog. Um, so that was the main reason why it was such a huge event at the time, and there were many deaths, not just because of the people suffocating, I guess, but also things like road accidents, because people literally couldn't see across the other side of the road. It was that thick at times. So yeah, quite an event.
And so the weather had a big part to play with this temperature inversion, as you described it. If we had levels of emissions or pockets of emissions in maybe small neighborhoods. Could the conditions be right for another smog
Mm.
episode?
Certainly, we get anticyclonic conditions like this all the time, and certainly we do get the buildup of fog. The only difference, I guess, between then and now is that we don't have the same cocktail of emissions. Generally, even when people are burning coal in their homes, it tends to be smokeless fuel generally, and nowhere near as poor quality as was burnt then. A lot of the factories that were really very polluting then were either cleaned up and or removed because an act was passed soon after that actually to limit the amount of those sort of emissions. Some factories were made to have much taller chimneys, so the pollutants were emitted into the atmosphere much higher up. And these things generally led to a far cleaner, compared to then anyway, far cleaner
Mm.
atmosphere. But as we know, things, we found as the science has moved on and we understand far more about what's emitted from cars, etc., we have other sort of problems now with pollution.
Yeah, as you alluded to there, the Clean Air Act that came in 1956
Mm,
kind of reduced the amount people were burning at home. So that was kind of removed as an issue. Of course, we still have air pollution. It's just from different sources, different places. So I think transport would be our main offender, and
mm,
then we'd have wood burning stoves, combustion processes as well. But I think from what you're saying there, the actual cocktail of these emissions are not quite the same as they were in 1952. So hopefully won't be experiencing any smogs, but
yeah.
there's still work to be done in terms of clearing it up. So the pollution we experience now is obviously very invisible, yeah,
Mm,
microscopic, and
yes.
altogether different. But
Yeah.
equally, we do need strong Clean Air Act in order
Mm.
to address this.
Definitely. I think, like I say, it doesn't stop us from having the odd event that's quite bad. Obviously, not as bad as before, but we all can remember times on bonfire night where we smell slightly sulfurous fireworks in the atmosphere at the time, and/or in winter walking past various houses who are burning wood in their
Mm.
fireplaces. You can smell it outside the houses. So we know there are conditions where very locally pollutants are elevated slightly because of what's going on in our various habits, in our behavior.